when you make a podcast, it's always nice to have a short musical intro, but it should be short. Some of the podcasts I listen to, they might have an intro music around 30 seconds, which is tiring the first time. But if you listen to several episodes, it's very painful to listen through 30 seconds of music. So I would say 10 seconds maximum. And you should always consider that people are listening in headphones, and they might have a quite high volume. So the music, if you use some kind of music, it should be music that fades in. You should not have music that starts with a crash cymbal. Because if you turn on the podcast, you're not quite sure about the volume, it might hurt your ears. So it's always better to have something that fades in and to keep it short. We made you into podcasting duos. Those who were not here last time, it's also for you. You are free to hook up with someone and work out the podcasting together, but you're always responsible for your own podcast. So you have to submit your own podcast, even if you work together. If you choose to do it individually, then I reckon you will be the one speaking. And there are two ways of doing it. You can obviously speak freely, but that's very hard for 5 minutes to speak about something and being coherent. Because you might end up, I've tried to make video speaks, and I have to do them over and over again. I try to put cues. That's of course possible if you make some kind of script with cues that you know roughly what to talk about. But you can also choose to make it from a script, because with a podcast, we can't see you. So if I make podcasts or clips, I normally read from a paper. You would think that it might be more stiff, that it sounds as if you're reading, but if you practice, and if you write, you should write it exactly as we speak. You should write spoken language and not have complicated words. Try to have short sentences. Then it can sound quite good, because otherwise you end up having the and those are things that you don't notice yourself. I've noticed when I edit my own video clips, I've noticed that every single clip I start, okay, and then I start speaking. And these are manners, everybody has them, and it's okay, but very easily you might start saying every 5th second. You will not notice yourself, but it's quite disturbing for the person who listens. If you always say or you have a word that you repeat all the time. So it might be a good idea if you are just recording it on your own to actually write a script. It takes longer to write the script, but I think recording, especially if you are aiming at some kind of quality, I think recording will be easier when you can read from a script. You might have to reread it anyway, but at least you don't have to think so much. Because the problem is, if you are speaking freely or from cues, at the same time that you are speaking, you will be subconsciously be planning for what you're about to speak about next. And it confuses you. So that's one way of doing it. You speak yourself, either freely or from a script. Since you are divided into duos, or you can have a partner, you can have a podcast where you speak together. And there are 2 equal hosts, and you talk about something, preferably the company that you are supposed to market. You can also be 2 persons, but one of them is the host, and the other one is the so-called sidekick. We talked about it last time. A person that has a minor role, but is there to challenge, to ask questions of the host, and kind of to drive the podcast forward. You can also make an interview that one of you is the host and the other person is being interviewed. We did that last time here in class. We made an example podcast and then I was the host, introducing the program, introducing what we're going to talk about, introducing the guest, and so on. And of course, you can make everything up. It doesn't have to be a real interview, just make up the answers. You can also have a discussion of more than two people. There are many podcasts. I've listened to one podcast that used to have 6 or 7 people. And it's okay, but it gets confusing. Because since you can't see the people, on TV it would be fine to have 7, 8 people, because you can direct the camera at who's speaking. But when you can't, then it's sometimes confusing, and you actually don't know who is talking. So you should be, I guess now you're not planning to make a podcast with 7 people, but just so you know. Also, if you make a podcast, that's one subtle but quite useful thing. If you make a podcast with more than one person, you could use the paneration. That means, you always have left and right speakers or headphones. It's quite nice to have one slightly to the left and the other one slightly to the right. And to do this, you need to edit your material. And you have to make 2 tracks and record it in stereo. So maybe your equipment can't do it, but many podcasts, if you listen, if it's 2 or 3 persons, they are slightly, because then you're always used to that this person is coming in my left ear. Not entirely, but they are slightly to the left, and the other person might be slightly to the right. If you have a longer program, now you are just making podcasts of 5 minutes. So I guess you stick to the same topic all the time. But many podcasts are, as you know, like an hour. Many podcasts are not about anything in particular. It's improvisation, primarily by comedians perhaps. And they switch subjects, or actually a subject might run dry. You talk about something, it's interesting, it's funny, but then perhaps the last part is not that good anymore. So you can notice that they have edited and they have cut away. And that would sound really bad if you just talk and talk and talk, and then suddenly you start with another subject. So you need something as a marker to the listener that now we are switching subjects. It's the equivalent of having paragraphs in a text. If you are to switch subject in a text, you normally you even have a new headline perhaps and a new paragraph. So the same thing you can do with adding a so-called stinger. You probably heard them in radio. It's just a da-da-da-da, bam-ba-da-ba-bam, about that long. And it's to tell that something new is happening. Those should also be really short. If the intro is 10 seconds, I think like 3 seconds or something. If you have long stingers, because in a long program, you might have 10 different subjects and use 10 stingers. It would be very tiring if they are 20 seconds each. So keep those very short as well. About background music. I used to work in radio. About 15 years ago, I worked as a radio DJ. And we sent live for 3 hours a day. It's a radio channel in Finland, and I lived in Helsinki, and it was the morning show. So I got up at 3:40 every morning. And then I drove to work. I lived in Porvoo, and I drove to Helsinki every morning. And I started at 5. Then we had 1 hour preparing for the broadcast that started at 6. And then it was live broadcast for 3 hours every day. So-called stream radio, it's of course those 3 hours are filled to 70-80%. They're filled by music. Then you have the news, but then you have slots where around 5 minutes where the hosts and I was normally the sidekick. and sometimes the host, and where you talk about something, and we would always have background music. I think it's because in a radio format, when you play pop music, if it gets entirely silent and people just speak, it sounds a bit empty. So we would always have in the background just some kind of repetitive music, background music when we speak. In a podcast, I would suggest that you do not use background music. You could use it in the intro. Perhaps it could be a good idea to have an intro, and then you have a presentation where you talk about the program, what you're going to talk about, perhaps introduce the guest, and during that part, it could be nice to have some background music. But do not have background music on for 1 hour. That will be very tiring. If you have a longer podcast, then eventually you could perhaps use a stinger to break off the music, and after that it's silent.